My name is Sanit from the University of Auckland. It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Stephen Marshall, who will be talking about the ACODE benchmarks for technology-enhanced learning, extending the journey. Dr. Stephen is from Victoria University of Wellington, and also he is the president of the Australasian Council of Open and Distance Education. His areas of specialty is mainly around e-learning and benchmarking around it. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, it's great. As far as I'm aware from standing up here with the spotlight, the room is completely packed with people, so we'll continue on that basis. Highly enthusiastic audience, I'm sure. It'll go for us. There we go. All right, so I'll just bring up this picture in order to put a face to my co-author, Michael Sankey, who is also the person inside the ACODE organisation who leads the ACODE benchmarks. So ACODE is one of the three sponsoring organisations for this conference with Australasian Council for Open Distance and E-Learning. And our role is, as an institutional membership organisation, we are a group of people within the organisation who have a role stimulating and leading change within universities around the use of technology and its impact on education. So we see the benchmarks as an important tool enabling the member universities to share their understanding of where our good practice and where our weaker practices might be in the area of technology-enhanced learning, and work together collectively to make systematic improvements in that space. So this is the group of folk who turned up for the most recent benchmarking activity we held in a very frosty Canberra earlier this year. The benchmarks have been around for more than a decade, but we went through a significant refresh in 2014, and we've now run two benchmarking fora, which I'll talk about in summary as part of this session, and the paper provides a lot more detail about what's happened in those sessions. Not planning on making this a hyper-dense presentation, by the way. We're not going to spend the afternoon working our way through benchmark by benchmark, I assure you. It's far too tedious. What I will do, though, is show you the scope of the benchmarks that we have. So they're organisational benchmarks. So this is not an activity that's conducted at the level of individual academics or individual courses. This is not a benchmarking of how well somebody's used the LMS. This is a tool that's focused around how the organisation itself frames the engagement with technology and how it uses technology to advance its outcomes. So we have a benchmark area which looks at how that framing is done within the organisation, the policy, the governance, the strategic positioning of technology and its impact on learning. We have a benchmark looking at planning. So how is it that in good intention, those objectives are translated into action within the organisation? The infrastructure, the systems, the tools that are available, and making sure that those are fit for purpose and substantial and significant and able to be sustained. The translation of that into service, and one of the things that we spend quite a lot of time engaging with within ACODE in our conversations is the difference between a technology being available and a full service being available to academics and to students. And then the last four benchmarks speak to the professional development that we provide for staff and the support that's provided for their activities using technology, and then student training and then student support. And these questions are elaborated in some considerable detail. The reference is there. All of this material is available freely on the web for organisations just to pick up and start using for themselves. So we're quite open about wanting this to be used by as many different places as possible, because we think the value isn't actually in those specific questions, it's what you do with them inside your own organisation, and more particularly, as you'll see, what you do with them in collaboration with others asking similar questions themselves. So just thought I'd give you one brief example of what those benchmarks unpack into. So behind each one of these 8 statements, there are between 8 and about 13 individual items which unpack what that means in some significant detail. And so, for example, here we have under the performance indicator for benchmark number 5, which was that there is some recognition of the role of staff development in the university's institution's learning and teaching strategy. So there's some description of what it is that the organisation is trying to achieve. And in the full documentation, there's some background information on how to think about this and some ideas to reflect on. And then you're presented with these 5 possible statements that you can reflect on and engage with. And the intent here is that this isn't a quality assurance activity. You're not accountable to anybody for producing a rigorously referenced measure that's going to be critiqued by a team of people seeking to catch you out as committing some sort of fraud. This is meant to be a stimulus for thinking, in terms of what we're doing, this is roughly where we are. And in the benchmarking tool and in the support documents, we basically give you 2 sections. One is really, on what basis do you think that's true? So why do you think that it is that you have some partial alignment with strategy? Where do you see that in your organisation? And also then what you might do to do something about that. And part of the reason we want people engaging at that level is so that they can have a conversation with colleagues about that assessment. So in my judgment, we're a 3. In my colleague's judgment, we're a 4. We can talk about why it is that we might have different expectations. Actually, that's completely unrealistic. If it was me, I'd say we have a 1, and my colleague would be arguing for me to be more positive. But you get the point. It's meant to be an engagement that you do. We have 8 benchmark areas, but not every institution chooses or wants to apply every one of those benchmarks each time they do. And this is a really important point here. Benchmarking is a process that you do in order to do something significant inside your organisation. So the starting point for coming into any benchmarking activity should always be an internal conversation that says, imagine a world in which we've done this, we've done a really good job, we have an extremely detailed and very insightful report about our capabilities, our strengths, our weaknesses. What would we do with that? How would that be part of some meaningful action inside our organisation, and what are we going to do about that? And if you think about what it takes to get universities to do things like that, that immediately suggests to you that rather than having some team of technocrats sit in a dark room and make a very detailed technological assessment, that suggests that you need to go out and have this conversation much more widely right from day one in your organisation. You need to involve senior leaders in your organisation, show them the benchmarks, ask them the questions, get them to give their indications and sense of what's strong and what's weak, because that builds buy-in and engagement and a sense of ownership of the process right from day one. We were really quite impressed with our Deputy Vice-Chancellor Research, who turned up to one of the workshops that we held inside Victoria when we did this, and she spent a good hour with us talking through and understanding why it was that different people were seeing different things when we looked at what our organisation was doing. So the other thing that this shows is that many of the universities have chosen to concentrate only on a few of the benchmarks. And there are several different rationales for that. In some cases, people were hitting this for the first time and they had very limited internal experience in doing benchmarking, and they were playing it safe by picking a couple of areas that they felt they could have a good internal conversation about and just learn what it is that they were doing. Others were very strategic. So they chose benchmarks that they knew related to something that the organisation already was trying to achieve. And that's the next thing that you can do to really deliver value with benchmarking, which is to work out what it is that are the strategic agendas and the priorities that your organisation has, and then use benchmarking as a tool to inform that, to stimulate it, and to shape it. I mean, you always know you're doing well in this space where the response to your work from a senior leadership is for them to take credit for the thing you've set up and represent back to the community the argument you've given the evidence for as their own original thought. That's brilliant. That means you've actually succeeded in this space. Other universities have chosen to do all of the benchmarks and essentially by that get a picture or a snapshot across the whole institution at a given point in time. And that can relate to the need to inform perhaps a new senior leadership team, to perhaps test the state of the organisation following some major investment or just prior to a major investment. Because one of the things that we would emphasise with this is the value in longitudinal use of the tool. So some institutions, you can see from this table, have chosen one time in 2014 to use one set of benchmarks and then in 2016 to use another. Some have repeated the same set of benchmarks. And we expect 2018, 2020, 2022, etc., people will continue to engage over time with this tool and refine their own sense of progress and change in the organisation. The other thing that's quite good to see here is the 35 universities that have been part of this thing over the last 2 or 3 years, which is a measure of the scale of impact that we've been able to achieve with the benchmarks. And to emphasise, this is not just an Australasian audience. We have very strong support from Australian and New Zealand universities, but we've also had universities from South Africa, from the South Pacific, from the UK participating in the process as well, and bringing a wealth of experience and a diverse set of perspectives to that process. The model that sits behind the ACODE benchmarks is absolutely critical to its success, which is to say it's a model of collaborative benchmarking. We don't have an absolute reference point that we're measuring against. What we provide is a context for a conversation between peers that's creative, it's social, it's stimulating, it generates new ideas and imagination in the participants. It doesn't pretend to know what excellence and success look like in this space. We are in far too dynamic a space, far too fast-moving a space for us to be able to generate a recipe for success in a specific technological frame. What we can do is provide a network where people engage with others and recognise the complexity of the problem that they're encountering, and also see creative solutions that address elements of that. I'm very much a fan of saying that we exist in a wicked problem space, which is to say there are no solutions that will simply work perfectly for us. There are merely choices that move us forward in ways that we value and help us better understand the evolving nature of the space the university is operating within. And you get most of that by engaging with colleagues. So this is a picture of the room in Canberra where we all sit around and we listen to each other's stories of what capabilities they have and on what basis, and we interrogate each other and look for examples that we can build upon in a safely collegial space. So one of the things that we run with here is basically Chatham House rules, which is to say we'll talk openly with our peers in this room, but nothing comes out of this identifying who said what and who's got what rating, because it's not meant to be about that public ranking of institutions. It's meant to be a tool for getting a job done inside the organisation. And one of the things that you get, which is really interesting out of this, is, so what this graph shows is for one of the benchmark areas, the one around staff development, the range of assessments that people make of their institutions. And this is a proportional graph. So you can see for number one, essentially about 3 institutions, about 2, gave themselves a 1, in that they believe that there is nothing in their strategy that speaks to the idea of professional development. A fair chunk, somewhat there, most put themselves in the middle, some at one end, some at the other. And if you look across the different benchmarks, you can see that the mix of assessments of capability that are happening in the organisation, and that for any one organisation you can place yourself in that continuum and ask yourself, does that really reflect our reality, or is someone like Stephen far too pessimistic, or are we just being far too optimistic? And one of the things that the collaborative space allows you to do is to take an initial assessment of where you're at, listen to other people talking about what it is that led them to rank themselves at different points in these scales, and then update your assessment. So for our own university, we came with our assessments. We talked it through, we made significant changes in where we decided to ultimately position ourselves in this set of data, and then we were able to take that back to our institution and say, on reflection, in a form of peer review, this is where we see our capability at this time. But I think the other thing that this emphasises is the diversity of capabilities and assessments of capability that are out there in the sector, and the opportunity that this presents for everybody to share some things that they're getting right, but also to acknowledge that this is really hard and that most of us are genuinely struggling to make this sort of stuff work for our universities, and that it's perfectly okay to acknowledge that, because this is a complex and hard space that we're working in, and that's just the pragmatic reality of where we are. We do a formal evaluation because why wouldn't you? And people clearly value this on an individual basis. So as a personal mechanism for understanding the nature of the challenge we've got and understanding the nature of the things that we can do in the organisation, this type of collaborative activity is very, very rewarding to the individual people that lead and engage with that process. So I encourage you to participate, because people really do find this fun, surprisingly enough. But the thing that I wanted to draw your attention to was how collegial this was within the organisations, because the collaboration that happened in that room was simply the tip of an iceberg of collaborations that were happening in the individual institutions that participated. So this is the 27 institutions that took part in the 2016 benchmarking activity, and you can see that I think one institution only had one person involved, essentially just touching the water. One of the institutions had 100 people inside their university engaged in understanding what it was that their capability was. And our experience has been that even someone incredibly knowledgeable about their university will still be surprised when they talk to other parts of the university about what it is that's being done in just these basic 8 areas. So there's definitely value in the collaboration in the individual institution, both in terms of the comprehensiveness and accuracy of the assessment, but also in terms of building the relationships inside the organisation that are part of doing something about this. When you finally come to the end point of having done the benchmarking, you've already built the team of people who are more than likely to be the people who can collaborate in doing something about the assessments and in improving the outcomes for the organisation. And people believe that this will generate change. So we're very big on the idea that we do something about improving the outcomes for our organisations, and the people that have been participating in this thing genuinely believe that too. So everything to do with the benchmarking is available for free, so you can literally just download the workbooks, sit down tomorrow and start doing it. It's better if you do it with a friend. And all of the New Zealand and Australian universities, I think with very few exceptions, are members of ACODE, so there's already an opportunity, even if you haven't been part of one of these initiatives to date, and I'm more than happy to put people in touch with the ACODE rep for your university if you've never heard of this before and want to be part of it in the future, so we can make that happen for you. Just put up a brief slide thanking the various folk over time who have given us money, some of them dearly departed sources of funding, but that's the nature of the space that we're in. And one of the measures of the impact of what we've been able to achieve with the ACODE benchmarks and its international scope is that we're about to go to the UK, Michael and myself, to work with the Open University in the UK, where we're running a version of the benchmarking summit and workshop with UK institutions in June, and we expect that it will turn into a multinational activity over the next few years. So we're looking very forward to that opportunity to engage with the universities in the UK. Many years ago, when I first started working in the e-learning space, I naively assumed that all I had to do was go and find out what it was that the Americans were doing, and that would be the recipe that we'd just use in New Zealand and all would be well. And then I discovered they had no clue. So I went looking further and discovered that the UK had no clue and Australia had no clue and that we had no clue, and then I thought, great, opportunities to learn new things. So, yeah, happy to take questions. We've been handing out flyers, by the way, for the ACODE Learning Technologies Leadership Institute. More than happy to talk about that. You'll be hearing from me tomorrow morning just before the keynote, so I'll give you another ad at that point. But just to emphasise, we've extended the registration price for that until the end of May, so you've still got an opportunity to get in there and register yourself or your colleagues to that important activity as well. And I'm happy to take questions, not that I can actually see anyone in the audience.